chapters. So that's how the book of Daniel is. Okay, so if we look at Nebuchadnezzar, he really got uncomfortable grace from God. And God confronted him, his destructive pride. And God used his sovereign control to humble Nebuchadnezzar to bring him to the end of himself. He had two choices. What were the two choices that Nebuchadnezzar had?
Humble himself before God or go in the wild for 7 years?
Yep, humble himself. And you're hitting on it by saying that he was going to become a beast, but he was really going to humble himself, or what was the next option?
Be humble.
Yeah, to be humbled by God. And how long did God give him to choose?
Like a whole year?
Yeah, he did, 12 months. It's exactly right. So Daniel chapter 5 records the last day of the Babylonian Empire. There's about 20 years that have passed since chapter 4. Nebuchadnezzar is not living anymore, and we have a king by the name of Belshazzar. Okay? Not to be confused with what's Daniel's name, very close.
Belteshazzar.
Yes, so very close. But so this is the king, and so let's turn to Daniel 2, and I would like to read 36 through 39. And if you go back to Daniel 2, 36 through 39, this is when Nebuchadnezzar had a dream. He had a dream of a statue. And this is Daniel explaining some things to Nebuchadnezzar about his dream. And what does it say in Daniel 2, 36 through 39?
This was the dream, and now we will interpret it to the king. Your Majesty, you are the King of Kings. The God of heaven has given you dominion and power and might and glory. In your hands he has placed all mankind and the beasts of the field and the birds in the sky. Wherever they live, he has made you ruler over them all. You are that head of gold. After you, another kingdom will arise inferior to yours. Next, a third kingdom, one of bronze, will rule over the whole earth.
Okay, so Daniel is explaining the dream that Nebuchadnezzar had. And in it, he told him that he was what? He told him some things there about his kingdom from God. What did he tell him about his kingdom?
It's all downhill from here.
Okay.
Yeah, he's made them ruler over
Yeah,
all.
okay. God made him rule. He made Neb rule. He gave him the kingdom. What else does he tell him? In that vision, in that dream, in that statue, he tells him
about the kingdoms that's coming after his.
he does. He tells him, after you, there are kingdoms coming after you. And then he also tells him something about the statue.
He's the head of gold.
You are the head of gold. So that plays into, how do you think that plays? Let me ask you a question. How do you think that plays into chapter 3 when he turns around and makes a gold statue? Do you think there's a correlation between that dream and the interpretation? Yes, you're saying, saying yes?
Yes.
Why do you think that?
Because I think, besides him being all arrogant anyway, I think that put the idea in his head that for him to be gold. And even with the interpretation, he said that, God has given you the kingdom, the power, the strength, and the glory. And he reverts says all of that back while he's standing there looking at all of his kingdom.
Right.
So in my mind, that's already in his head.
Right.
That God has given him that.
Right. And do you think the statue being all gold, he's told he's the head of gold? Do you think the statue being all gold had any bearing on why he did that? The statue that in the dream he saw had different metals in it. And do you think there's a reason why he did all gold?
Yeah, because gold was superior.
It was superior, that is true, and that was the most superior kingdom. That is true.
But I think it was like an affront to the dream that God gave him. It's like, oh yeah, this is gonna happen. Well, I want to make a golden statue.
It seems that way,
Yeah,
doesn't it?
yeah.
It really does seem
Kind of a
like that.
defiance.
Yeah,
I'm
exactly.
more than just the head, I'm the whole body.
Yeah, exactly.
Maybe,
So, go
Jenna,
ahead.
maybe he thought he was helping God out. I mean, maybe he thought, well, I mean, you know,
Well, he
God's-
built you the statue.
God's told him that, and
Yeah.
he's like, I'm gonna help you out, God. Here you
Yeah.
go.
Yeah, okay. Any of those are possibilities, and there's reasons to think that way. Obviously, we don't know, but there's reasons to think that way. So here we are in Daniel chapter 5, and we're gonna go through these events. And it won't take a lot of time to do that, but, which is, like, tonight was a good night too, and thank you, Elaine, for getting everybody to bring food, and thank you, everybody, for doing that. But let's read Daniel chapter 5, 1 through 7, and let's see what's going on in this chapter.
Belshazzar the king held a great feast for 1,000 of his nobles, and he was drinking wine in the presence of the 1,000. When Belshazzar tasted the wine, he gave orders to bring the gold and silver vessels which Nebuchadnezzar his father had taken out of the temple, which was in Jerusalem, in order that the king and his nobles, his wives, and his concubines might drink from them. Then they brought the gold vessels that had been taken out of the temple, the house of God, which was in Jerusalem, and the king and his nobles and his wives and his concubines drank from them. They drank the wine and praised the gods of silver and gold and of bronze, iron, wood, and stone. Suddenly, the fingers of a man's hand emerged and began writing opposite the lamppost on the plaster of the wall of the king's palace, and the king saw the back of the hand that did the writing. Then the king's face grew pale, and his thoughts alarmed him, and his hip joints went slack, and his knees began knocking together. The king called aloud to bring in the conjurers and the Chaldeans and the diviners, and the king spoke and said to the wise men of Babylon, any man who can read this inscription and explain its interpretation to me will be clothed with purple and have a necklace of gold around his neck and have authority as third ruler in the kingdom.
Okay, so let's talk about a few of the details that Elaine read. What was going on?
We're having a feast.
They're having a feast. And then what does Belshazzar decide to do?
Break out the good stuff.
Yeah, he broke. That's
The
true.
gold, silver,
Good
cups,
confidence.
yeah.
And where were those? Where were they from?
Jerusalem.
Yeah.
The temple.
Right.
That's the temple
So-
elements, yeah.
Right when chapter 1 opens up, we're told that Nebuchadnezzar took the vessels out of the temple and took them to Babylon. As far as we're told, those haven't been touched in all these years. But he decides, we're having a party, hey, let's go get those. Okay, and then there's part of this drunken orgy that they're actually using the vessels. Now, what's unique about the vessels that came from the temple?
Gold.
They were gold, okay, what else is unique about them?
Were they holy and wasn't only the priests allowed to use them?
Yeah, they were set apart for service for God, that's what, and so that the holy means set apart. They weren't, the priest didn't drink in them there and then take them home and have dinner. They were set apart for service in the temple, okay? So it was a big deal that he chose to do that. So what else happened after that? So he took the vessels, what else happened?
Then comes the hand.
Okay, he sees a hand.
Yeah.
So we got the handwriting on the wall.
That's where we get that saying.
Huh?
That's where we
Writings
get
on the
that,
wall.
that saying
Right.
from, saying the handwriting on the wall.
Yep, it is
That's where
true.
that comes from.
Okay, what else do we see?
They were praising idols made of gold, silver, bronze,
Yep.
iron, and wood, and stone.
Everything made the list but the one true God, right? You know? Okay, and then what else do we see there? Yeah, the king freaked out. That's exactly right. So what was the impact on the king? What description are we given about the king?
He was pale.
He was pale.
His knees were knocking.
Knees knocking knees. Yep.
And his hips were weak.
Yep.
So basically, he's fainting.
Yep. He was faint, and he was, what was his internally? What was he? Yeah, he was alarmed. Mine says, some say may say frightened.
Yeah, mine says frightened.
Okay. Okay. All right. So that's the situation that he's in the middle of, and then who do you call?
Ghostbusters.
Yeah, exactly. And I did that for you.
Yes.
I threw you a bone, Dan.
Yeah, that's a softball right there.
So after all these years, who do they call again? I mean, every time
Yeah.
you see this, who do they call?
They call all the wise men,
All the
whoever they
wise
could get hold
guys.
of.
And how are they? And actually, they're batting at what? 0 for 3.
Oh yeah.
Right?
Oh, for yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And so when the wise guys say, "I can't help you," what was his response?
He was scared too.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So wait, but that's in verse 8. So we didn't read that. Let's read verse 8 and 9. What do we see there?
Then all the king's wise men came in, but they could not read the inscription or make known its interpretation to the king. Then King Belshazzar was greatly alarmed. His face grew even paler, and his nobles were perplexed.
Okay, so the result of the wise guys, again, here's the 0 for 3 is what? That we got nothing, right? That's exactly right. And then how does he respond when his best people, got my best people on it, how does he respond to that? Yeah, he gets more scared. That's exactly right. Okay. It's important to put this celebration that they're having, all of these events in the context of history. And reality is, the Medes and the Persians have completely surrounded the city of Babylon. And a lot of people wouldn't think that's a great time to have a party. But the fact that he had a party showed what about Belshazzar? Given the situation. And they've been out there for a while. What was in my head was 2 years, but I'm not 100% sure on that, but I know they've been there for a while. And this is the last city of the empire to survive the conquering of the Medes and the Persians, okay, of his kingdom, okay? So why do you think that he would have a party like this with the enemy totally surrounding the city?
Well, he probably thought that it wasn't situationally aware, or he thought, well, if they're going to destroy me, I might as well have a party.
Okay. It
Yeah.
could be that, but I think it's more than that.
He was arrogant.
There was arrogance that led to that party, and I think there's more to that too. Do you remember last week when we described when Nebuchadnezzar, God finally goes, "Your time's up, I'm going to humble you"? He was looking at the city that he built. Do you remember any details from the city that Nebuchadnezzar built? The wall was really high and wide. It's 300 and some feet high and 87 feet wide. So that sounds pretty impenetrable, right? Is that a word? Did I say it right? Okay. So that led to a false sense
Security.
of security. They had 20 years of food on the inside of the city. What ran through the city to give them a constant source of water? What was it? Do you remember?
Tired?
I tried. Wrong.
Is it afraid?
It was.
Euphrates,
It was
yeah,
the
yeah.
Euphrates River ran right through the city. So they had all of these things. That's why, that's why when Nebuchadnezzar surveyed the city, he goes, "Wow, look at this great place I built." And it probably played into the false sense of security that Belshazzar and the pride and the defiance maybe almost that was behind the scenes in having this party. Okay, so let's read Daniel 10 through 12. Do I have to split you two up? Let's read Daniel 10 through 12.
Get the naughty chair tonight.
Exactly.
Daniel 5.
Yes.
The queen, because of the words of the king and his lords, came to the banquet hall. The queen spoke, saying, "O king, live forever. Do not let your thoughts trouble you, nor let your countenance change. There is a man in your kingdom who is the spirit of the holy God, and in the days of your father, light and understanding and wisdom, like the wisdom of the gods, were found in him. And King Nebuchadnezzar, your father the king, made him the chief of the magicians, astrologers, Chaldeans, and soothsayers, inasmuch as an excellent spirit, knowledge, understanding, interpreting dreams, solving riddles, and explaining enigmas were found in this Daniel, whom the king named Belteshazzar. Now let Daniel be called, and will give you the interpretation." Isn't it 13 or?
No, that's it. Okay, so most likely, we don't know, we don't have a name, we don't have an identity for this queen that entered. But she shows up, he's dressed, and she comes, and most likely it's like a mom. It sounds like, she wasn't at the party, she hears about it, she comes in to help him out, okay? And so what is the advice that she gives him?
Called it.
Huh?
Call Daniel.
Yeah, who are you gonna call? Call Daniel. Exactly. That's exactly right. It's advice. And she tells him about Daniel, right? And what description does she use about Daniel?
A keen mind.
Say what?
He had a keen mind and.
Okay.
In whom is the spirit of the Holy God.
Okay. And we've heard that same observation, that same characterization of Daniel in almost every single chapter up to this point in time. Okay, so before we go on, I made a mistake, so it says Daniel 5:18. I lied. Okay, so it's supposed to be Daniel 2, Daniel 11, and Daniel 22. I want to address this issue here, and that is, who do people tell Belshazzar that Nebuchadnezzar is to Belshazzar? How is he described? So let's go back and look at verse 2.
His father.
His father. And twice in verse 2, and then look at verse 11. What do we see?
Your father, the king.
Exactly. Okay, and then let's look at verse 22. And we're going to read this in just a second, but what is 22? And this is Daniel talking. How does he describe the relationship between Nebuchadnezzar and Belshazzar?
You, his son.
Yeah, here you're, okay. All right, so clearly that is the description. The word in Aramaic that's used there can be, it's kind of like family tree. So it can be father, you would use that word. Grandfather, you would use that word. Great-grandfather, you'd use that word. So just so we know that. And so we're going to come across things in the book of Daniel where people are going to go, we don't believe that Daniel was written when it was. They always want to put it in instead of 605 BC to 539 BC, they want to put it in like 165 BC. And we'll get into that as we go through. But so they pick at things throughout the book and say, well, that's not true. And when there has never been any archaeological find that says that Nebuchadnezzar is the father, the grandfather of Belshazzar. There's not been one, okay? And so that the way that someone will criticize, knowing that, becomes a way that people criticize the Bible. Do you know what that is? Did I ask that in an understandable way?
When they find the.
You're saying it's I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
I'm sorry.
I was just gonna say they find the missing gaps in history to question the authority of the Bible.
And that's kind of right. I wouldn't say it exactly the same way, but I think we were thinking the same thing, and that is that what they're saying is the absence of evidence is actually proof of an error of the Bible. And constantly, that's what is used, and that it's important for us to be aware of that. So and for years they said there was no king, no person named Belshazzar in history, and of course it took some time, but there are 2 artifacts that have Belshazzar's name on them. And so that's what we can say. There's some theories about the lineage and all of that stuff. They're theories. And so and if you want to look at that, you certainly can. But what we do know is that he was historical. We know if they found archaeological artifacts to support his name and that time period. And it's also important to note that there's never been one archaeological find that has disagreed with the Bible. Everyone they find, and we have hundreds of thousands of them in museums across the world, every one of them has supported the history of the Bible. And that's true for the artifacts that have been found regarding the book of Daniel.
Well, the Babylonians like to change their names.
That's true too. That's a problem, right?
So he
Okay.
might have taken over as
Hey,
king, he might have had a different.
That's a new theory. That
he
is,
might have- Well, they changed Daniel's name to Belteshazzar.
right? So
And-
that's a good new theory.
Well, and Jenna, not to chase a rabbit, but how
Yes.
close, I mean, he's the son.
Yeah.
You would think he would know about Daniel. I mean,
Well,
I just keep thinking.
okay,
about-
okay,
I wondered that too.
okay,
Well,
we'll
they're
go
having
there.
to
That's a
remind
good
him.
point.
Yeah.
You're
Yeah,
like, hey, your dad.
Yeah, right?
Your dad's the
Right.
king.
Yeah, right?
Right.
So that's a good point too. And we 2 people, okay, the queen and Daniel, who served in Nebuchadnezzar's court for his whole, 50 some years. He served in his court. The queen probably knew it, okay? So we have 2 people, and because they're in the Bible, they dismiss them as a witness. They are an eyewitness, a first-hand witness. And if in court today, if we interviewed somebody and they were a first-hand witness, we would accept their testimony. But because it's a Bible, and that's not uncommon, and it's how people's approach is to the Bible. But we're going to address that other thing in just a second. Okay.
Yeah, what's
And it's a
the, sorry.
woman,
Huh?
It's the queen,
and it's
yes.
a woman.
Oh well, that's true too. Okay.
Oh, I was gonna ask, what was the time frame difference from the last chapter to this one?
About 20 years, based
So he
on
could
the
be,
end.
he could be 20 years old,
We don't know. You're exactly
too,
right.
so like, you're having to remind him because his dad's been dead, for-
Right.
Not to
We
mention
just
he's probably drunk.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's-
well, he's
Well,
well,
that's
part of
true,
it, like,
too.
hey, remember your dad.
He's a little bit
Remember
buzzy
soft
from the
stuff.
night before the.
Let's start from the beginning.
No,
Okay.
the queen is probably the only one he would listen to.
It's,
The
that
others
is
probably
possible.
knew.
It is possible. But he was scared.
Right.
Okay, so let's go on and let's read 17 through 24. And this is Daniel. He comes before the king. Okay, and this is what Daniel says to him. Okay. Okay, and let me say this. You can read this, but it gives you a real sense of Daniel's in obscurity. It's like he was front and center up until this point in time, but if you read in those verses there, but between 12 and 17, you get a real sense of Daniel's not majorly involved with Belshazzar and the running of his kingdom like Nebuchadnezzar is with Daniel, okay? So let's go to 17 and through 26, 24.
Then Daniel answered the king, You may keep your gifts for yourself and give your rewards to someone else. Nevertheless, I will read the writing of the king for the king and tell him what it means. Your majesty, the Most High God, your father Nebuchadnezzar, sovereignty and greatness and glory and splendor, because of the high position he gave him, all the nations and peoples of every language dreaded and feared him. Those the king wanted to put to death, he put to death. Those he wanted to spare, he spared. Those he wanted to promote, he promoted. And those he wanted to humble, he humbled. But when his heart became arrogant and hardened with pride, he was disposed from his royal throne and stripped of his glory. He was driven away from people and given the mind of an animal. He lived with the wild donkeys and ate grass like the ox, and his body was drenched with the dew of heaven, until he acknowledged that the Most High God was sovereign over all kingdoms on earth, and sets over them anyone he wishes. But you, Belshazzar, his son, have not humbled yourself though you knew all this. Instead, you have set yourself up against the Lord of heaven. You hid the goblets from his temple brought to you, and you and your nobles, your wives, your concubines, drank wine from them. You promised the gods of silver and gold and bronze, iron, wood, and stone, which you cannot see or hear or understand. But you did not honor the God who holds in his hand your life and all your ways. Therefore he sent the hand that wrote the inscription.
Okay, let's stop there. I want us to boil that down. So here we see basically chapter 4 in a nutshell repeated in communication from Daniel to Belshazzar. There's a couple of things that I think are important. So it kind of goes to, did Belshazzar have an understanding of that event in Nebuchadnezzar's life? Let's ask that question. Look at verse 22.
Yeah, it says that he knew.
Yeah, he knew about it. And so he's telling him this whole story. He's telling him this is what happened. And he said, and you knew it. You knew what happened. And now it's been 20 years for him. I don't know how long he's been in charge of the kingdom, but he knew about it, okay? And so that's one thing we know that is clear from there. Okay, and in essence, what would you say was Daniel's communication, his bottom line with Belshazzar? And that was part of it. You knew about it, and what's the other part?
He said you took the elements from the temple, used them for your revelries, and now you're wondering what the writing on the wall is and how it pertains to me.
Okay, and that
But
is,
he was saying like he used those holy things not well.
right, and that is true. He's pointing that out. Is how he used the temple vessels. So, and what else is he pointing out?
You did
Worships
not honor
created
God.
things, but not God.
Yeah, he did not honor God. I think you guys are kind of saying the same thing there. And what else?
He set himself up against the Lord.
Yep. And what caused him to do that? Yep.
He thought he was all that.
Both. That is true. His pride
Right.
and alcohol probably played a big role in that too as well. But so we see that in him and in Daniel's communication to him. Okay? And what else is God? What does he tell Belshazzar about God? Did we read that? What did he tell Belshazzar about God?
Yeah, he holds his soul.
Yeah.
Holds his very life in his hand.
Every breath you've been taking since this happened, God gave you.
And his ways.
Yeah, and what does that tell us? Because that's true for us. Every breath we've taken since class started and before we came here, every breath, what does that tell us?
By the grace of God.
Yeah, it is by the grace of God. Anybody else?
You can't outrun God's sovereignty.
Okay.
I gave it to you and I can take it away.
Okay. Anybody else? That statement shows how utterly dependent on God that we all are,
And then we should be fearful of him.
and a respect for Him.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay. All right. Let's read 5:30.
We're gonna do 26 and 27.
How about that too? Thank you.
This is the interpretation of the matter. I guess, I don't know, mini? I
Yep,
guess?
yep.
God has numbered the days of your kingdom and brought it to an end. Tekel, you have been weighed in the balances and found wanting. Peres, your kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and the Persians.
Okay. Then Daniel gives him a reward, and then read 30. Not Daniel. Belshazzar gives Daniel a
Belshazzar gives
reward.
Daniel.
Yeah. Thank you. Okay. Then 30.
And then, that very night, Belshazzar, the Chaldean king, was killed.
Okay. So.
You're done today.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. They have excavated Babylon, and they have found a very long room where the wall is covered in plaster. plaster wasn't a unique, I thought, well, maybe plaster's unique during that time. It wasn't unique during that time, but it's interesting they did excavate a very long room, which would be like a banquet kind of hall with plaster walls, which was the description in this chapter. So what's interesting too is the Medes and the Persians came in that night, and what they did to the city. Does anybody know? Does anybody have a guess? What they did to the city?
They burned it.
Nice try.
Razed it.
Nice try. They dammed up the river and diverted the river and walked under the walls. And that's how they conquered Babylon. And this is what Cyrus, who was the conquering king, this is what he wrote, okay? He said, Marduk, the great lord and protector of his people, held in pleasure Cyrus. And because of his good deeds and upright mind, he ordered Cyrus to march against Babylon. And Marduk made him set out to the road to Babylon, going at his side like a real friend. Without any battle, he made him enter Babylon, sparing Babylon the calamity. And again, it's because they dammed up the river, diverted the river, and were able to walk under the walls and conquer the city.
It was easy to conquer because they were all drunk inside
Well,
there.
there's, yeah, but and again, they figured out a way to conquer this city. So turn with me to Isaiah 45. We're almost done. We just got a couple more things. And if I hadn't eaten, we would not have gone over. So, it's true. Isaiah 45. One through 4, and keep in mind that this was written 150 years before Cyrus was born, okay? So would somebody read 1 through 4 of 45?
This is what the Lord says to his anointed, to Cyrus, whose right hand I take hold of, to subdue nations before him, and to strip kings of their armor, to open doors before him, so that gates will not be shut. I will go before you, and will level the mountains. I will break down gates of bronze, and cut through bars of iron. I will give you hidden treasures, riches stored in secret places, so that you may know that I am the Lord, the God of Israel, who summons you by name. For the sake of Jacob, my servant, of Israel, my chosen, I summon you by name and bestow you on a title of honor. Though you do not acknowledge me, I am the Lord, and there is no other.
Okay, it's kind of ironic. That sounds like what the credit he gave to his false god. It really sounds very similar to that. Okay, so what does God tell us through the prophet Isaiah when 150 years before Cyrus was born? What does God tell us about Cyrus? What was his purpose? Why was God with him?
He's the right hand.
Okay, and what is his purpose for that reason? For what was God's purpose for calling in those things?
Subdue nations.
Subdue nations? If we go back and read through Jeremiah, we would find out that God said, I'm using Nebuchadnezzar, but I'm also going to punish that kingdom for what they do to this nation of Israel, okay? But there's an important phrase there in Isaiah 45 about his purpose. Do you see that?
I will do this, or you may know that I am the Lord.
Okay, that I'm God. So we see his sovereignty again. But look at this start of verse 4. What do we see there?
To his anointed Cyrus, whose right hand I take hold of, to subdue nations before him and strip kings of their armor.
Is that 4?
Oh wait, sorry, that was
That's okay.
one.
That was for free.
Okay, so 4, for the sake of Jacob, my servant, of Israel, my chosen, I summon you by name and bestow on you a title of honor, though you do not acknowledge me.
Okay, so why did God send Cyrus to conquer Babylon, besides the things that we've already mentioned? Pardon? Well, he said it was for my people, for Israel, he handpicked Cyrus to go and conquer for his people. And let's see what he'll do in verse 44, or chapter 44, 28. What does Cyrus do?
Do not tremble, do not be afraid. Did I not proclaim this and foretell it long ago? You are my witnesses. Is there any God besides me? No, there is no other rock.
Okay, so I think you're reading another free one.
Oh,
44,
Okay.
28.
whoops.
Yeah, it's all good. Okay, look at 44, 28. Yeah.
Sorry, I'm
My
on-
bad. No, it's
Who
okay.
says of Cyrus, he is my shepherd, and he shall perform all my pleasure, saying to Jerusalem, you shall be built, and the temple, your foundation shall be laid.
150 years before Cyrus was born, God is declaring what the purpose of Cyrus is. And what is it in that verse?
Rebuild Jerusalem,
Yeah.
and restore the temple.
Absolutely. And it is under Cyrus that they go home. They rebuild the temple and they rebuild the city of Jerusalem. So we see that there. Okay, what do you think led to the fall of Babylon? Or Belshazzar, I should say that way. What do you think led to the fall of Belshazzar?
Pride, arrogance, worship of idols, not acknowledging God.
Yep. Anybody else?
And the elements was probably the last straw. Like when they took the temple stuff.
Yeah.
We were just like, I was like,
That blatant idolatry.
yeah, blatant idolatry.
But really, when we can look at Daniel's sermon to him, and we can say, well, this is what was at the heart of what was going on, and based on Daniel's sermon to Belshazzar, what would you say? And you said it, Elaine, and all of those things are true, but what would you say was the heart based on what Daniel communicated hit on with Belshazzar?
He knew it and he ignored it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And he didn't do what?
Honor God.
Yeah, he didn't honor God, and he didn't humble himself before God. So I want to end
But he
with,
also told the story of Nebuchadnezzar being humbled and how he humbled him. But he
Yes.
got his kingdom back.
yes,
Well, but in this one, he said, well, you're going to be humbled and you're going to die,
yes. You're
basically.
Yeah, you're
That's
exactly
what-
right.
yeah.
And so pride is central to what happened in this kingdom, okay? So I'd like to turn this and finish on 2 Chronicles 7:14. And what does that say?
Second Chronicles what? Sorry.
7:14. You stayed awake, I appreciate
I'm
that.
about not there no more.
Wow, I didn't see it, so.
Says, if my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear from heaven, and I will forgive their sin and will heal their land.
Thoughts about us in our country.
We need to wake up.
We need to turn back to the Lord. Put that everywhere he was taken out of, put him back.
And notice in that verse, who is he addressing those words to?
All his people.
Not talking about anybody that doesn't relate to God.
And he's saying that all of his people are that are stirred or that are moved by the thought of him, or that who are called by my name. So like that have interest or are called by him.
And we can point the finger around us at our culture and all the things that are horrible that are going on, that are in your face God, in your face against God, but he's not even talking to them, and there's a promise in there of what will God do for the people who humble themselves and pray and ask God to forgive us. And we're going to see a great example of this in Daniel chapter 9. But what does God promise?
Forgive their sins and heal their land.
Yeah, he will forgive our sins and he will heal them. I think it's an important verse to, for us to finish on. And any more thoughts from anybody? Don't expect next week to be 35 minutes, it's not going to happen. Don't expect food next week, right, Elaine?
That's
Scott and
right,
everybody
that's
else.
not gonna happen.
Let's close. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you so much for your kindness to us and for the book of Daniel and for the communication in it and the things that we can look at and are so important for us to look at. And God, I just pray that we would look into our own hearts and evaluate where we are in relationship to you, and that we would humble ourselves so that we can hear you, and that we would also repent of our sins so that you will heal our land. Thank you for this group of people. Thank you for making us a group and bringing us together. And for each person that's here, whether their needs are spoken or not, you know them all. And we lift them up before you and ask that your will would be done in and through the circumstances, and that you would make us to be the people that you desire us to be, and that we would trust you. Even though you do hold every breath that we have, that we would trust you with what your sovereign will is, and embrace you and your sovereign will with our lives. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
Thank you, Jenny.
There is still dessert over here.